The Ottawa Senators' quest to make the playoffs for the first time since 2017 begins tonight as the Sens open up the regular season at home against the defending Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers. To set the stage, let's go to Ottawa. Here is Hanna. Claire, when a new coach comes in, he often tries to temper expectations, but not the case with Travis Green. Explain.
Yeah, well, I think you just reminded all the Senators fans about how long this playoff drought has been. 7 years we've been talking about how this team can get back into the postseason. And one thing I find really interesting, Gino, is the past 2 years we've asked the players, okay, what are your expectations this year? Last year, Brady Tkachuk said, well, we want to be playing meaningful games at the end of the season, but they've always dodged the playoffs word. So one thing that's big and a big difference this year is that finally they're saying, yeah, we want to make the playoffs. Tim Stützle talked about the pressure that's on this team. They know that this fan base is getting impatient, getting frustrated. These players are getting frustrated. I remember in the locker room from about February until the end of the season, that was the word that kept coming up, frustrated. And so I like that they're just putting it out there and saying, yeah, playoffs is our goal. And further to your point, Travis Green said, you know what, we're in the business of winning, and I know that winning's important. And so that's what they want to go out and do.
And if you're going to change the ending, you got to change the beginning. And a big part of that, I think, is Linus Ullmark. He signed that 4-year, $33 million extension yesterday. You spoke in the guys in that room. What's it mean to them to have a guy who just won the Vezina only 2 years ago, now locked up for the next 5 seasons?
The first player we spoke with after Linus signed that extension was Brady Tkachuk. And right when we asked him about it, his face lit up and he said, yeah, this is so exciting. He brought up the fact right away that he has a Vezina winning trophy caliber goalie. And this core has been continuing to take steps forward each year, but their back end has struggled. And when I talk about their back end, I really talk about their goaltending. Last year, they were tied in the league for worst save percentage, and it's been constantly something that's come up. And sometimes, whether it's Steve Staios or the coach has said, well, you know what, everything in front of them needs to also improve. But at the end of the day, if you're letting pucks in the net, that's the issue. So bringing Ullmark in is just, it's going to be a huge boost for this team. And they also bring up the fact that not only is Ullmark fantastic on the ice, we saw him do some dazzling things just in the preseason. I know it doesn't count, but that still counts for something. But off of the ice, he brings in this leadership. He's a big communicator. Guys are just talking about how they hear his voice in the locker room, and I don't think that's typical of goalies. I know there's some out there who take on that leadership role, but that's also important for a group that's been pretty young over the past few seasons, just getting that veteran experience in there.
When you have a goalie, it can make up for a lot of mistakes, especially defensively. Let's talk about the top 6 now on the blue line. It seems to me from an outsider looking in that they're as strong as they've been in a few years now on that back end. Do you agree with that, or do you see some holes still there?
Well, you talk about maybe their top 4 defensemen. I think they're really strong. Jake Sanderson continues to get better and better, and I think he's only 22, 23 years old. He's running their top power play unit. Last year, we saw him get in there a bit, but it was Thomas Chabot who was running the power play unit. So already you've seen Jake Sanderson kind of become the number 1 defenseman on this team. Artem Zub is just, he's a really calm presence on that blue line as well. And then they added Nick Jensen in that trade for Jacob Chychrun. But let's go to the third D pairing. I think that's where a lot of people are going to be focused on this year. Tyler Kleven, he comes in with just 9 NHL games of experience last year. He got a bit of action in October, in November as well, and then as the season went on. But 9 games isn't a lot. And it's been that third D pairing that has always been criticized here with this organization. So I think he's got a big role to take early on. And he didn't start training camp very strong. He even admits it himself. He said, yeah, I had a bit of a slow start. They want him to kind of exude his presence on the blue line. Just be that big body guy who kind of bangs people around. He's going to be playing with Travis Hamonic here on opening night. I'm not sure how much Jacob Bernard-Docker, how much action he's going to see this year, because throughout the preseason, he was in and out a lot, but when I watch practice and watch skates, he's always kind of that 7th defenseman. So I'm interested to see how that plays out. But knock on wood, they don't get injured, but injuries are always bound to happen. And if they have an injury on the blue line, that's where I'm keen to see how do they respond and how do they try to keep that level up.
Speaking of injuries, I want to ask you about Josh Norris. It seems like we talk an awful lot about him. What have you seen from him so far, and what's your level of encouragement or discouragement from what you've seen?
Well, I'm encouraged. I know that we were all on Josh Norris' watch at the beginning of camp when he wasn't playing the first few preseason games. But what really encouraged me is in his first game, he was taking faceoffs right away. I think he took something like 13 faceoffs. And with his shoulder surgery, I mean, his third shoulder surgery, and I think something like 4 years. I know he's had 2 in the last 2 seasons, but that's the big concern because he's injured himself once doing the face-off, and then he injured himself behind when he got hit behind the net once. And so I'm happy to see him at least look confident doing the face-offs. Now, this morning at morning skate, he was practicing his one-timer from his position on the power play on the right dot, and he was practicing that one-timer from a couple of different positions. Some of the passes he were getting, they weren't right on the stick. I think they were trying to kind of sauce the passes up in the air, give him different speeds to work with, but he didn't look entirely confident. We've called that Josh Norris's office in the past. 2 seasons ago, he was electric on the power play. Just, it felt like every time he got the puck there in the dot, he scored. So I'm keen to see as we start the season how strong he looks this year, because he is a huge piece to this team on the center, on the power play. And if he doesn't stay healthy, that's when I think we're going to have some big discussions about the depth of this team, especially down center.
Yeah, listen, tonight, as I mentioned, open at home against the defending Stanley Cup champs, which makes for a pretty interesting situation for Nick Cousins. Tell us about that.
Yeah, Nick Cousins taking on his former team, and I sense he had some FOMO when they were doing the unveiling of the rings a couple of nights ago in Florida. And, on social media, you're seeing all the boxes open, and he was here. I was watching him at practice, and I thought, oh, man, this is probably a tough scenario for him. But last night, he went to dinner with some of his former teammates. He got his ring. He said that dinner felt a little bit like closing the chapter of last year. Those were brothers. He said it was the best. He's been a bit of a journeyman in the NHL, but that was his best experience, no doubt. He won a Stanley Cup with the Panthers. But I think for tonight, you're going to see a very feisty performance from him. Paul Maurice, we were just speaking with him an hour ago, and he said, you know what, I think that Nick Cousins is very underrated. We saw him play on that second line for the Panthers. I think it was through their Eastern Conference final. And so we know he's got some scoring ability, but he's going to be playing a role here with the Ottawa Senators that is to bang guys around, to get under their skin, to do some trash talk, and I think also provide some scoring. So it'll be really fun to see him on the ice tonight in that atmosphere. Home opener, former team, Stanley Cup champion.
Home openers are always a fun time for the players themselves and the families, and that almost always means mums and dads where they get the opportunity to drop in, to be there and share that moment. And one dad in particular, not surprisingly, drawing a little extra attention, Claire.
Yes, Keith Tkachuk is here, and I don't want to discredit the other families that I've seen trickle in throughout the week, but he arrived in town yesterday, I believe. Maybe he got here a bit earlier, but we saw him at practice yesterday, and I was speaking with him. The first thing I said, hey, congratulations on being a grandpa, or granddad. What do you want me to call, or what have you been asked to call, or what have you asked Ryder to call you eventually? Not that Ryder's speaking yet. And he said, I want to be called Biggie. Yeah. Which I find hilarious.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think that Chantal Tkachuk, she's going to be Cha-Cha. So that's a little insider information for you guys. But I said, well, okay, one of your sons has won a Stanley Cup. We saw how emotional it was for your family. I said, I love how tight-knit your group is with your daughter Taryn on the ice. You guys were all in tears. But I said, now you got to be cheering Brady on. He said, yeah, well, I saw how happy it was for Matthew. Now I am cheering it on Brady. So I think there might be some favoritism, you guys, this season for the Senators for Keith Tkachuk, when in the past I'm sure it's been equal.
Yeah, listen, they've got a cup ring in the family. Now they'd love to see Brady get back to the playoffs with this team. They haven't been there for 7 straight years. Claire Hanna in Canada, where the Ottawa Senators are set to open up the regular season against the defending Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers.